Hey, what's going on, Cloud Scholars? I hope everyone's having a good day. My name is Kieran Tross, and today I'm going to explain managed identities in Azure. I know a lot of people get confused with this. They really don't understand exactly what it is. And when you start bringing up service principles, they're thinking the same exact thing. So if you are new to Azure, or your organization is just moving to Azure and you're thinking about how do I manage service accounts, these two are the way to go, right? You don't want to use any user accounts within Azure at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a quick PowerPoint slide, not to bore you to death or anything like that. And I'm going to jump into the portal as well in this video just to kind of explain a couple of things as I go. Okay, so when it comes to Azure AD service accounts, there are three types of service accounts that you can have. You have the managed identities, you have the service principals, and then you also have user-based service accounts. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, how do I go about using them? So this is a screenshot that I got from Microsoft's website, and I'm actually going to put the link in the description. But I'll explain it to you as I go through this presentation. So we have service hosting, right? So that column right there is just saying if the service is hosted in Azure, and then what service account that they're recommending you use. So if the service hosted in Azure, it's saying use a managed identity that is recommended for it. You can also use a service principal if you would like, but do not use a Azure user account. And if the service is not hosted in Azure, then it says do not use a managed identity. Then a service principal is actually recommended for this one, but it also says do not use a user account. And then if service is multi-tenant, it says no managed identity. And then it says service principal, yes, and Azure user account. So at this point, you might be thinking, hey, a service principal is something that you would use more often. And for these cases, absolutely, you are right. One thing you want to stay away from is the Azure user account, and I'm going to explain that as well. So when we're thinking about passwords and user accounts, a user account is going to have its password changed and rotated every now and then. So if it's a regular user account, like you're logging in with your username and password, you're going to get reminded to change your password. But if you have a user account that you're using as a service account, right? When does that account get reminded to change? A lot of times when they're setting them up, if you're thinking from an on-prem standpoint, check off that box saying password does not need to be rotated. The problem with that is if the account was set up, today, and then 6 months from now, it's the same password, or, the person who set it up leaves the organization, they still know those credentials. And that's where a problem can occur. Also, you got to think of hackers, right? If you're keeping your password the same, then it's more of a chance for it to get hacked. So this is one of the reasons why you want to do a password rotation, and this is one of the reasons why user accounts aren't really the best option, because what happens with a user account, you have to go through this process, and I've dealt with this with customers where they have a whole bunch of service accounts, and those accounts, the password hasn't been changed in the last 3 years. They have turnover, and now they need to come up with a rotation for those service accounts. And that's one of the things that you'll have to end up doing, and it's just a lot of work. So let's get into managed identity types. So there's system assigned managed identities, which is a one-to-one relationship with the Azure resource. So there's a unique managed identity associated with each virtual machine, tied to the Azure resource lifecycle. When the resource is deleted, the managed identity associated with it is automatically deleted. This action eliminates the risk from orphan accounts. And if anyone has worked in IT for, a certain amount of time, they will know that service accounts, a lot of times what happens is the purpose of that service account, the application may now be decommissioned, and that service account is still there. And that's what that last line is talking about, that this action eliminates the risk of orphan accounts, because those accounts are still in limbo, nobody's using them, and guess what? Now it can get compromised. Now, an old employee leaves and then puts it on the dark web, and then credentials on the dark web, whatever. So those are one of the reasons why system assigned managed identities are so great, because it keeps your Active Directory hygiene really clean. Because what happens is if that resource that the managed identity was associated with gets deleted, and my managed identity gets deleted as well, so that you don't have an orphan account. So also the second part is the user assigned managed identity. The lifecycle is independent from an Azure resource. You manage the lifecycle yourself. When the Azure resource is deleted, the assigned user assigned managed identity isn't automatically deleted. So that's a key point, and that's when I put it in red, because with the system assigned managed identity, that resource, that managed identity gets deleted with the resource. With a user assigned managed identity, it does not happen that way. Going back to user assigned managed identity, assigned user assigned managed identity to 0 to or more Azure resources. So the system assigned managed identity is a one-to-one relationship. With the user assigned managed identity, it's one-to-many relationship basically. And then you create an identity ahead of time and then assign it to a resource later. So I don't want you all getting confused with the whole system assigned managed identity and the user assigned and managed identity. Let me go into the Azure portal and show you exactly what I'm referring to. So over here at the Azure portal, I am on a virtual machine. I'm going to click on this one right here, this East VM3. And if I go here to identity, you'll see right here it has that same information that I was referring to earlier, the system assigned, and then there's a user assigned managed identity. Over here with the user assigned managed identity, you can click add, and then you can add a managed identity. Now, if you come up here within Azure and you type in manage identities, this is where you go about creating your managed identities. So I'm going to walk through this in the next video. For this video, I'm just going to go through the theory, and then the next video, part 2, I'm going to really go through and talk about, how to create a managed identity. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of managed identity. Credentials are fully managed, rotated, and protected by Azure. Identities are provided and deleted with Azure resources. Managed identities enable Azure resources to communicate with services that support Azure AD authentication, which is really big because you're most likely going to be using those resources, so this way you can authenticate with AD to do some type of job. And then this is a really big one, which is no one, including the global administrator, has access to the credentials, which can be accidentally leaked by being included in code. So that's really huge right there. You want to use those managed identities to do the authentication. And I'll show you exactly how that works with creating the managed identity and giving it access to whatever resource you want it to have access to and those privileges. Now let's talk a little about service principal. A service principal is a local representation of an application object in a single Azure AD tenant. It functions as the identity of the application instance, defines who can access the application and what resources the application can access. A service principal is created with each tenant where the application is used and reference the global unique application object. The tenant secures the service principal sign-in and access to resources. So we're talking about service principal and the authentication. There are two mechanisms for authenticating using service principals. You have the client certificates and then you have the client secrets. Let me move my mouse there so you can see. Certificates are more secure. They use client certificates if possible. Unlike client secrets, client certificates cannot be accidentally be embedded in code. That's one of the things that people are very afraid of, is that an engineer comes in, puts that information in code, and then all that information is out there for all the other engineers, and you never know what people are doing. You're trying your best to keep credentials safe. And secrets are a part of those kind of credentials, so certificates are the way to go. So this is the last slide where we're talking about governing service accounts. This comes some tips to govern service accounts and how you should approach it, which is one, plan your service account. What is the purpose of it? That's one of the first things you want to figure out. What's the purpose of that service account? Because what happens there, it rolls into every other item here in this list. Assign an owner for the service account, right? You want to make sure that somebody is assigned to it or a team is assigned to it just in case somebody leaves, so that this way, if you need to have a conversation about it, you're like, okay, what we're using this for? And you have people to talk about that. Hopefully you have a description as well for that specific object, so that this way you can do the right thing. Then you want to do is apply the right permissions, right? You always make sure that you're doing least privilege. So try to figure out what the application needs access to, what jobs it's going to be completing, and do a test run. See exactly what permissions you can give it, and then try to roll back some of the permissions, right? I would always start off with least and then give a little bit more, and see how that works. Lifetime for the service account. You don't want service accounts, hanging on for like the next 15, 20 years, right? You always want to make sure that there's a lifetime for that service account. So, hey, we're doing this job or working with this application. Let's give it a lifetime for a year. And then if we need to extend it, go ahead and do that. Access reviews are really great. One thing I would say is just because you need access those privileges this month doesn't mean 3 months from now you'll still need those same privileges. Things change, businesses change, there might be a change in the direction of the company, and for that reason 3 months from now I say, hey, we don't really need this anymore, or we need to reevaluate the privileges or who has access to this, so that this way that we're staying within our compliance. And then lastly is a naming convention. It's extremely important that you have a naming convention that makes sense. Sometimes I see service accounts created and I'm like, okay, what's this for? The service account has no type of naming convention to even give you some type of indicator of what it was created for. So these are some of the tips that I have for governing service accounts. You can actually grab some of this information as well from the Microsoft documentation, and I'll put that in a link in the description as well. So that is the end of this video. I hope that the information I provided you was beneficial. If you haven't done so already, please smash that like and subscribe button. Here at Cloud Scholars, our goal is to get you from scholar to consultant and from consultant to expert. Thank you, and see you next time.